Hello everyone, welcome to today's live class. I hope you all are doing well and practicing Python. Okay, so today's topic of our Python class is when to use for loop and while loops in Python. So today's topic is basically based on what is the correct point of using loops in Python. And it is very important for us to know that when to use for loop and when to use while loop so that we can understand our program easily and we can work on it finally. Okay, so today we are going to discuss one of the most important topics in Python, loops, especially when to use for loop and while loops. So in programming, loops are used when we want to execute a block of code repeatedly until a certain condition is met. Instead of writing the same code multiple times, we use loops to make our code shorter, cleaner, and more efficient. Okay, so firstly we'll understand the theory part. What are loops, when to use for loops, when to use while loops, how to use them, and then we'll move to quiz session and then we'll see some of the examples. Okay, so firstly let me tell you what are loops in Python. Okay, so a loop allows us to repeat a set of instructions as long as a certain condition is true. It helps us automate repetitive tasks and handle large data efficiently. So it is very easy with loops to also handle large data. While working on projects and all, we use loops to handle large data so that our code is minimal and readable. So basically there are two types of loop first in Python. First is for loop and the second is while loop. So we'll also understand what are for loops and while loops. So firstly let's understand what are for loop and when to use for loop. Okay, so a for loop is used when you know in advance how many times you want to execute a block of code. So for a real world example we can say that we want to print a thing only 10 times. So we will use for loop because we know when we want and how many times we want our program to be printed. So we use for loop when we know how many times we want to execute a block of code. It is mainly used to iterate over a sequence such as list, tuple, dictionary, string, or a range of numbers. So I'll tell you some key characteristics of for loop. Okay, so for loops are used for definite iteration, means the number of repetition is known. As I already told you, basically we use for loop when we know how many times we need to execute the block of code. And the second characteristic is it is commonly used for looping through collection. So for loop is basically used for looping through collections like list, dictionary, tuples or ranges. Thirdly, it automatically ends after completing the sequence. So once the sequence is completed, it automatically ends. So these were the key characteristics of for loop, and now I'll tell you when to use for loop. Okay, so basically there are some simple concepts when to use for loop. I'll tell you one by one. So firstly, when you know how many times the loop should run, this is very simple and basic. Secondly, when you are iterating through items of collections like names, numbers and etc., then we use for loop. And when you want structured iteration with less control logic, this is very important, that when you want structural iteration with less control logic, so we use for loop. And some examples I would tell you about for loops are printing all elements in a list, iterating through characters of a string, running a block of code 10 times, or printing a multiplication table for till 10 times. So we can use for loops there. And now I'll tell you about while loops and key characteristics of while loops and when to use while loops. Okay. So firstly I'll tell you what are while loops. So a while loop is used when you don't know in advance how many times you want to execute the code. So sometimes the execution of code is not known. Sometimes you want the things to be printed unlimited times, or the certain things which are not known. So at that time we use while loops. Yes, definitely we'll cover function and file handling in Jupyter Notebook. We are day by day we are taking our topics advancedly, so we'll cover all the topics related to Python basics, and then we'll move to intermediate and advanced section. So a while loop continues as long as a certain condition remains true. So till when the condition is not true, the while loop continues to run. And I'll also tell you some key characteristics of while loops. You're most welcome. So stay active in today's class. You'll definitely enjoy it. And I want everyone to reply in the chat so that we could know you are engaged and you are liking today's class and you are understanding something. Okay, so I'll tell you the characteristics of while loop. So while loop are used for indefinite iteration. The number of repetition is not known beforehand, and it also requires a condition to check each time before repeating, and it may continue running until a break condition is met. So kind of we can say it is an indefinite loop also. And the most important thing I would tell you when to use while loop is when the number of iteration depends on a condition, not a sequence. Means basically on conditions we use while loop. When you want to keep looping until a specific event occur, or when user input or real-time data controls when the loop should stop. So at that time we use while loop. Okay. So I would tell you some example situations from while loop. So when keep asking for a password until it is correct, and keeping reading sensor data until a limit is reached, or waiting for a specific condition to change. So these were the simple examples of while loop. So now I'll tell you why loops are needed. So imagine you have to print numbers from 1 to 100. So writing 100 print statement would be impractical or literally time wasting for you all. That's where loops help. A loop lets you automate repetition and focus on logic related of repeating codes. So loop basically help us that we should not repeat our codes, and through a simple line logic we can perform our task. And loop also make our program easy to modify, easy to debug, and easy to scale for large data also. So let me tell you what is the basic concept of for loop. So it is also known as a sequence iterator. For loops are also known as sequence iterator. Similarly, while loop are condition based. We basically use for loop when we are working with list or sequence types, and we use while loops when we are working with conditions. So I hope you all have understood the theory part nicely. If you have understood, you can tell me on the chat. Okay, so those who are active in today's in the live class right now, you can tell me that do you understood the theory session so that we could move to the quiz part, or you want me to more explain the topic? Okay, so should we move to the theory part? Should we move to the quiz session? Okay, so now we'll definitely move to the quiz session. So the first question, okay, so the first question is, a for loop is best used when you know how many times the loop will run. Okay, so this is the first question for today, that a for loop is best used when you know how many times the loop will run. I already told you this question many times in the theory part, so I think you can answer it very easily. This is also a very easy question. A for loop is best used when you know how many times the loop will run. So you have to answer in yes or no in the chats. What is the correct answer of this? A for loop is best used when you know how many times the loop will run. Okay, so I would tell you the correct answer of this. So the correct answer is yes. A for loop is best used when we know how many times the loop we want to run. Okay, now we'll move to the second question. A while loop will always run only once. This is also a very nice and interesting question. A while loop will always run only once. You have to answer in yes or no in the chats. A while loop will always run only once. Okay, so you are answering yes. Okay, so the correct answer of this is no. Because a while loop runs repeatedly as long as the condition is true, it can run many times or infinitely also. Okay, so now we'll move to the next question. Okay, so the third question is the for loop can be used to iterate through list, tuple and string. This is also a very easy question. Okay, so the next question is a for loop can be used to iterate through list, tuple and string. I told this its answer many times in the theory. So those who have listened the theory part, so they can answer it very easily. Okay, so can you tell me what is the correct answer? Okay, so let me tell you the correct answer. So the correct answer of this is yes, the for loop is designed to iterate through any iterable object in Python. Okay, so the next question is a while loop stops when its condition becomes false. A while loop stops when its condition becomes false. You have to answer its output in the chat. Not its output, you have to answer in yes or no in the chat. A while loop stops when its conditions becomes false. Okay, so you are saying the answer is yes. So yes, the correct answer is yes, the while loop depends entirely on its condition. Once false, the loop stops. So the correct answer is yes. Okay, so the next question is a bit tricky but nice. If you forget to update the condition in a while loop, it can lead to an infinite loop. Okay, so the next question is if you forget to update a condition in a while loop, so it can lead to an infinite loop. Okay, so this is also simple and easy question. If you have understood loops well, you can answer it easily. So you have to answer its output in yes or no. Okay, so I would tell you its correct answer. So the correct answer is yes. The loop will never become false, causing it to run forever. So the correct answer of this is yes. Okay, so I hope you understood the concept of loops, and now we'll move to the simple example parts. Okay, so firstly we'll see simple examples using for loop and while loop. Okay, so basically I told you we use for loop when we know the iteration is fixed till what number. So we'll use for loop in range. So this is the simple example. You can tell its output in the chat. The range will generate number from 1 to the defined number, and I is the loop variable that takes each number in range. So the code inside the loop print I is executed once for each value of I. After the last number, the loop automatically stops. So you have to tell me its output in the chat. Okay, so you are saying it will print the number from 1 to 6. Okay, so let's see its output and you can check whether you are correct or not. See, it printed the number from 1 to 5. Because 6 is excluded in the range. So here we used for loop because we know the number of iteration. Okay, now we'll see a very simple example of while loop. Okay, so here we are using while loop. Now you have to tell what will be the output, and so here I'll tell you its explanation. The loop checks the condition before any iteration. If the user enters the wrong password, the loop repeats, and once the user enters the correct password, means once the condition met true, the condition becomes false and the loop stops. Once the user enters the correct password, the condition becomes false and the loop stops. After stopping, access denied is executed. So let's see its output. So firstly, let's check by entering a wrong password. Hence it again asks to enter the password, and now we'll enter the correct password. Hence it printed access granted. So this I told you before also where to use while loop, and this was a simple example to use while loops. Okay, now we'll move to another example. So we'll move to a comparison example. Firstly we'll use for loop and then we'll use while loop. Okay, so you have to answer what will be its output. Okay, so we'll see what output does this will give. Okay, so your answer is correct somewhere. So here the for loop, the range function defines start, stop and step, which is simpler for defining iteration. So the 2 is starting, 11 is the stop, and this 2 is to skip the step 2 times. Okay, no problem. So now we can use while loop to write the same example also. So let's see how we'll use while loop in the same example. Yeah. So now this is how we use while loops in this. Yeah, hello. Let's see its output. So we can see the similar output. Firstly we have seen for loop and now we have seen while loops. Okay, so now we'll move on to another example. Now we'll use for loop to print the elements in a list so that we can see how we access. Yeah, these were the same output, but I was just telling you how to use for loops and how to use while loops. Okay, so now I'll tell you another example using for loop. Okay, so now you have to answer that what will be the output of this. Okay, so let's check what will be its output. So it printed the square of the range of the numbers from 1 to 6. This was the range and it printed the square of the numbers. Yeah, you are correct. Okay, so now let's see one more example using while loop. Okay, so can you tell what will be its output? Okay, so we'll see what will be the output of this. Okay, let's see. Okay, so it started the countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, and at last it printed blast off as we have written in our code. Okay, so now we'll see how to print each characters of a string using for loop. Okay, so you can tell me its output. What is the output of this? Yeah, let's see its output. Okay, so it printed the characters of a string line by line. Okay, so now we'll see another example using while loops. Yes, I'll definitely tell you how you can become logically strong. You only need to understand the basic concept and make your understanding level good. So, once you started understanding the concept, then you can easily build your logic strong. Okay, so tell me the output of this. And to become logically strong, there are some key concepts to understand. Firstly, know data types, loops, conditions, functions very nicely. In maths, understand numbers, patterns, and basic operations. Logical thinking start with understanding concepts deeply. That's why we are taking our classes from basics then to advanced so that you can build your logic easily, and that's why we start from the theory session so that your understanding level could be more good. Okay, so let's see its output. What output does this gives? Okay, so let's type something else first. So it will ask us to type yes or no. Let's see. So as we typed yes, it gave us the answer. You typed yes. So this is how we use while loops. So do you have any doubt related to today's Python session related to for loops and while loops? Anyone have any doubt related to today's Python session related to when to use for loops and while loops? Okay, so you understood loops nicely, na? Okay, so today we learned loops in Python. For loops are used when numbers of repetition is known when iterating through a sequence. While loop used when the numbers of repetition is unknown and depends on the condition. How to think logical, understand concept deeply, break problems into smaller steps, practice problem solving daily, learn from mistake and stay curious. Okay, are you asking where I am from? So, I'm from India. I'm from India only. Okay, so you can tell our class is on alternate days. I'll give you a link of the WhatsApp channel so that you can join. Okay, so you can join this WhatsApp channel so that you can get the updates of the live classes. Many of you have already joined this. Okay, so thank you all for joining today's session. Keep practicing loops, try new challenges, and always remember that loops are like muscles. The more you exercise it, the stronger it becomes. Okay, so do you have any doubt? You can ask me right now. Okay, then we'll meet in next class. Till then, happy coding. Bye everyone.